In the mitochondria, it's all from mom. So you get your mother's bioenergetic genes. This is why we get so much autism with each generation, because moms are not healthy anymore.
Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 of the podcast with Christabelle, where we explore the magic of your mitochondria in a little bit more detail and importantly get to actionable strategies that everybody can do to improve their mitochondrial function and therefore their overall physical and mental health. Enjoy.
We're going to get pretty complicated here because we're going to talk about complex 4, we're going to talk about Christabelle C oxidase, but listeners, just hang with us here. This will get a little bit technical, but for me, I've only really dug into the impact of light, red light, and particularly near infrared light on our health and particularly mitochondria in the last couple of years. Talk to our listeners through this because it's pretty friggin' fascinating.
Well, I think you're probably going to tell us more than what I can tell you, Paul, because I'm not across all of the light spectral frequencies that do the different things in the cytochrome C oxidase and so on. I usually refer to my good friend and colleague, Nathan Siles. Have you heard him speak? So he is my my spectral light frequency guru, and I've got all his slides and all the different amazing frequencies that trigger everything across the sun, all the light frequencies as the sun moves across the sky. And nature is amazing because it's so specific. Like every single frequency's got a receptor in our body across different protein receptor sites, hormones. They look like certain nutrients. They trigger these pathways, that pathways. You can bring it down all to which light frequency as to what metabolic pathways you want to trigger. So I don't have all the numbers and the receptors and things in my head. I just know that we need to be exposed to the light across the whole spectrum.
Yeah, and Professor Grant Schofield, he sent me a paper that just blew my mind that shows that light actually has quantum effects on our cells, right? So we know it stimulates the mitochondria, does lots of, vitamin D, everybody knows sunlight's really important. But as you say, the different colors are different frequencies in light. We now know that red light, I think it's like 600 to 750 is really good for the skin. And then the near infrared stuff actually penetrates the skin and stimulates the mitochondria, and particularly I think it's complex 4 of the mitochondria, gets the mitochondria to then release nitric oxide, helps with the respiratory chain, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. Like it's crazy shit what light can do in the body, isn't it?
It is crazy. It's a different color for each of the electron transport chains. And
I never thought about it like that. Okay.
So I just wanted to laugh when you said about the red light with skin, Paul, because I've been watching this. I've been into light for about 10 years and looking at Michael Weber's light treatments. We do intravenous light therapy. The intravenous light therapy goes across all the spectrums of the colors of the light to feed the Krebs cycle, the different electron transport chains, stuff like that. It's all good fun. The Germans have been looking at it for ages, Michael Weber. And we've been looking at it with complex conditions, neurological diseases. How do you solve all these difficult problems? But I love it that it's the skin that everybody suddenly, wow, did you know red light's so good because your skin looks so good? I'm like,
yes.
Damn, I should have started with the skin in the first place, not all these difficult, unseen things. Anyway, like all the different colors, all the different spectral frequencies, even in each band of color, speaks even more deeply, not just the mitochondrial energy, but also to different receptor sites, as I was saying, in our cells, our hormones, all these different metabolic pathways. And the other week I was reading this amazing paper. I think it's already 2 or 3 years old. They're talking about optogenetic light switches. So they're studying different light frequencies to switch on and switch off mitochondrial light receptors. So optogenetic switches. So they're going to find exactly the frequency to turn on your metabolism so that you can burn fat faster and do this and do that better. Like, I can't wait till that comes out, but then I don't think Big Pharma is going to be able to capture that one, you know?
Jesus, that's crazy. Like, there's depths to this. Clearly, there's levels to this, and yeah, some of the research, but just understanding that the light can actually penetrate the body and directly activate the mitochondria is pretty amazing. And as you said, hormones and all sorts of stuff. And this is why it's important to get out into the friggin' sun, right? I think we've gone too far in this country with the slip. I always get that wrong. Slip, slop, 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 slip, whatever it is. But, you know, the fact that I think it's more than 30% of Australians, you might know the number better than me, but have vitamin D deficiency or insufficiency. I mean, it's comparable to bloody Scotland and Northern Ireland where the sun doesn't friggin' shine. But people don't realize the impact. It's not just vitamin D, but it's just the impact on hormones, then the impact on mitochondria, which then impacts on mood, on metabolic health, all of these things, right?
Indeed. I mean, that's been the big focus of a lot of my mitochondrial talks in the last several years, is just get your light environment right as a starting point. Because also I think that it is a very good opening point. You know how when you do something maybe more high up rather than top down, then if you get that, well, you do something more top down rather than bottom up, then that top down signal can help a lot of levels below. And I think that light is just that huge top down signal. And I see that in my patients. I say to them, look, apart from the sunrise, the sunset, go outside. I say to people, please clock in through the day, literally clock in, get your eyes to see the sun. That tells your brain clock, your circadian rhythm, what time it is. That sets up your metabolism and so on. But also just, you know, that light going in through your eyes, which is where all your most of your photoreceptors are through your eyes. Chuck away your sunglasses. That's what I hate, seeing people wearing sunglasses. And that body clock. So what I was saying is, if we get the light environment right, what I found, I see in my patients, is they just naturally start to be able to do the next thing I'm asking them to do. Start to move, start to exercise. Oh, you're suddenly motivated to get your diet better, whereas before we're like having to hammer this thing. But if you can get some top-down signals right, and people just innately inside them feel better, because this whole sensory environment, how I experience myself, my body, my light, my space, just feels better. It's like, oh, now I feel like doing this, now I feel like doing that. And I found that things just unfold better. So I always insist on the light environment with my patients. And then in my lectures, yes, I can go on about mitochondrial pathways, but in the end, can you just go home and fix your lighting?
Yeah. I never thought about it from a top-down perspective, actually. That's a really good point. Get the fundamentals right and things flow. I need to dive more into light. I do want to talk about, because when you mentioned it, I'm like, oh, that sounds pretty interesting. Mitochondrial psychobiology.
Yes, let's talk about that. And just with what you just said, I was wanting to say that, yeah, that top down is really about how your brain feels and senses the world that we live in. Let's go out in nature. Let's get the light. That's all a very sensory, very lived experience. You can't read that in a book. You can't just watch that on TV. Like, you have to move it, you have to live it, you have to smell it, you have to feel it. And light is a sensory input. So the brain is a sensory organ. And just as you move your muscles for plasticity of your muscles and mitobiogenesis of the mitochondria in your muscles, you want to put a lot of those inputs into your brain for that plasticity and experience of your brain, in the same way that you experience your body and your muscles and the whole sensory motor input through your postures and your actions and so on. So light, sound, your thoughts, what people say to you, what you're listening to, is your TV on in the background, Is CNN telling you all the awful
All
things
that negative shit. Yeah. It's inputs, right? It's inputs.
Yeah, so sensory input, I think, is a big part of what you want to lead to, which is mitochondrial psychobiology. So mitochondrial psychobiology is Martin Pickard's lab. Martin Pickard is a wonderful mitochondrial researcher as well. He was Doug Wallace's PhD student. Doug Wallace was the mitochondrial researcher that understood that mitochondria were maternally inherited. So we get them purely from our mothers.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. You said that in your talk. It's mum that passes on the mitochondria, right? Because their genes are independent.
That's right. So you get, well, from the nuclear genetics, one from mum, one from dad. But in the mitochondria, it's all from mum. So you get your mother's bioenergetic genes. And that's why it's very common to see through family history. It's the moms and the daughters that have the chronic fatigue, that have the different fatigue type syndromes. And then also I think that this would be related that, this is why we get so much autism with each generation, because moms are not healthy anymore. And we're having babies older and older. I get that. That is a whole modern lifestyle decision. But nature and modern lifestyle that's your mismatch. That is what Robert Naviaux talks about. It's a mitochondrial environmental mismatch. One was through nature was doing this, but in modern day we're doing that. And so that whole mismatch is that, we were supposed to probably have babies in our teens and 20s when the mitochondria are really young and don't have, not young, but, don't have as much mutation and don't have as much heteroplasmy, which I mentioned, which is simply environmental toxins and radiations and the normal environmental stress, which would normally mutate our mitochondrial genes. That's normal. But the accumulation of it over decades and then having a baby at 40, that's stressful for the next generation.
Interesting, because there was some recent research that I read. I think I talked about it in the podcast, and I can't remember the number, but maternal overweight is significantly impacting upon autism spectrum disorders and other things like ADHD. And that makes sense from what you just said, is that especially, we have declining health, we're more and more overweight, but as you said, women are tending to have children later. And then not only everybody knows that it's a lot harder to stay trim and fit in your 30s and 40s than it is when you're in your teens and early 20s. But I didn't think about the cumulative damage at a cellular level and on the mitochondria. And presumably then there's some sort of epigenetic effects from the it's not just the genes that are going, but an epigenetic effect from the mitochondria perspective.
Yeah, so the epigenetic effect of our lifestyle, our artificial light, blue light, toxic stress, 5G radiation, those are all the sorts of things that are stressful on genes. So then when the mother's mitochondrial genes and epigenetics are not that healthy and they're passing that all down to the next generation and what's happening to the generation after that, that is the epigenetics going on in the mitochondria. And that's why we're seeing more and more allergies, autism, ADD, ADHD, autoimmune. So those are the 5 A's that in environmental medicine we talk about a lot. And this is all very well established, very well known in environmental medicine in the last few decades. I'm just bringing the focus more to the effect through the mitochondrial genetics too, because when you've got heteroplasmy, which is when the mitochondrial genes mutate, they can change back. They change and change back all the time. They're very plastic. So it's just the true epigenetics that integrative doctors like us like to talk about is that you can change your environment and your whole condition and your whole health outcomes will be completely different. It is quite plastic, but at that mitochondrial level, I think it's even more plastic. But it's plastic through generations. So it's like mother lives their life well through a whole lifetime and has a baby well, and then that child grows up, lives a lifetime well through their whole lifetime. And in the last few decades, we've just seen such a crazy increase in environmental toxins and stress. And I think our mitochondria are really seriously copying it.
Yeah. So the mitochondria, let's come back to the mitochondrial cycle biology. So let's then talk about how this manifests from a psychological perspective when your mitochondria is not functioning well. I'm tipping that that's what mitochondrial cycle biology is.
Yeah. Well, I think you should interview Martin Pickard because he is still just doing the research. And the research is in the very early days, but it is pointing to that just how your mind frame is. So let's say in a week, you might wake up like really bright and chirpy 3 days a week and like just normal 2 days a week. And then maybe really sad or something's really got you down or you just wake up on the wrong side of bed 2 days a week. And they're doing some work that's showing that just how you feel that day will change your bioenergetics. Bioenergetics meaning how well is your redox capacity going through the mitochondria? How well will you do that whole energy exchange, ATP, energy, all of that. So he's obviously deep into the metabolism and biology of that, but he's now bringing in how does the mind also change that. It's a top-down, bottom-up exchange.
Right. I was going to ask, I presume that it's a two-way thing, right? Because Chris Palmer has shown you damage your mitochondria, you're more likely to get a whole host of brain conditions. And with brain, let's include mental health as well as neurodegenerative diseases. But what you're saying now is that your psychological state can then impact your bioenergetics. Now, that makes sense because we know that your psychological state can change the composition of the gut microbiome. We know that it can release inflammatory markers as well, which then can impact widespread throughout your body. So it's not a crazy leap to suggest that it would affect how your mitochondria function.
That's right. It's very new in actually being mapped out in research in the publications. I know it makes sense to you and me, but this is just what they're starting to find out. And it's not to say that, someone with a significant mitochondrial disorder, if you just make yourself feel better, do some laughter yoga and laugh and things like that. But I know it's not as simple as that because people out there definitely are struggling with some really difficult diseases. But what I'm trying to impress upon people is that, mitochondrial bioenergetics is summative. It adds up. Everything you do counts. It's not just your nutrition, the time you sleep, the light, the nature, the water you drink, how well you detox your body, how much you sweat, how much cold you do. It's like we stack it, right? So nowadays we talk about biostacking. We don't talk about biohacking.
Biostacking, I like it.
Yeah, biohacking is last decade, but
yeah, but it has real world implications for people, right? So let's make this real. It's getting back to what you said earlier on about the inputs, right? And so if we just take the mitochondrial cycle biology, if people are listening to lots of news stuff, right? All the negative news stuff. Now, human beings were not designed to hear about all the terrible atrocities that are happening to millions of people around the world, right? That's not what we are designed for. But then also, and particularly when you think about our teenagers, spending a lot of time on social media and especially this upwards comparison, which I think is really toxic. When we were kids, the natural condition of the brain is to compare yourself to others, particularly when you're a teenager, because you're trying to work out your place in the tribe. We were exposed to maybe 100 other teenagers at our school around the same age of us. But now people are exposed to thousands and they're seeing the best little airbrush snapshots of people who are more handsome, more pretty, more successful, more lean than them. And then that creates just negative energy, which then is going to impact upon your mitochondria negatively. So that in and of itself is shithouse for your mitochondria. I think that's a medical term. But then you add in exposure to all of these environmental toxins, ultra-processed foods, lack of physical activity, lack of sunlight. It's not hard to see how modern life is toxic to the mitochondria.
Yeah, I couldn't put it better than that. That is tough. That is the real world. And that's why the more we educate people, and that's why this is amazing, this podcast that you do, because it's teaching the generations. And for me, I'm treating very sick and very chronic, difficult patients. So I'm just trying to pull together every single little 10 to 15 to 20% of things that could be different to help the mitochondrial bioenergetics. And so that's why I'll come back to what I was saying. I know it's no fun to be in a lot of chronic pain and deal with a big condition, but one still has to change the immediate environment, sensory, felt, lived, moved environment around them.
I like that sensory, felt, lived, moved environment. That's pretty cool. There's a couple of other things I want to talk to if I can just get a little bit more time, because I'm loving this conversation. So I want people to walk away with an understanding about how they can improve their mitochondrial health, right? So before we go high level, so we'll get into, again, that's the whole sensory lived environment, but let's really talk about the mitochondrial complexes and how nutrition and nutrients play into those different complexes, right? Because my understanding is that the B vitamins, some of the B vitamins are really important in this. We know, I think, and I was going to ask you about this, if NAD has an impact on complex 1, and then we know that red light has an impact on complex 4. So what are some of the things that people should be thinking about nutritionally to support their mitochondrial health?
Okay, so nutritionally, so just food, I would start off with what time you eat. I would say you eat in daylight hours, because what time you eat is setting up your circadian rhythms, and your circadian rhythms do also talk to your mitochondrial pathways. So it's not what you eat, just it's also what time you eat. And so to set up what time you eat, I think it's always a good breakfast. And then if you're trying to fast, because there is fat to be burned and weight to be lost, and fast at night, which is the other way to what people like to do because of convenience. So
I'm with you on that one, by the way.
Yeah, breakfast like a king, right?
Yes, yeah,
Dinner
absolutely.
like a pauper, or skip it.
Yes.
So what time you eat, and then the next thing I'd move to is the macronutrient ratio. So the macronutrient ratio is fats, carbs, proteins, and in the modern world, carbs has become a bit of an enemy. Now, it didn't used to be, so I don't want to say like all carbs is bad. It didn't used to be. And I remember 10 years ago, I was traveling in Bhutan, and, I'm like, everyone needs to be low carb, like everyone's got metabolic syndrome. All my patients have metabolic syndrome, and they do. And then I go to Bhutan, and they're all eating huge piles of rice.
Yes,
and that's,
yeah.
I'm like, there's no one overweight here, and all these like giant mountain men eating huge piles of rice, and they're out in nature and they're walking around. So I realized, oh yeah, it's only when our mitochondria are in this modern environment, blue light, toxic, not moving, not exercising, then you need to eat lower carb. So for some people, that needs to be very low carb, depends on what kind of mitochondrial genetics and what their microbiome is like. And for some people, they can eat much more, especially if they're moving it, exercising. So macronutrients would be really think about the carbohydrate, and then really topping up on the protein, and then topping up on heaps of fiber and good fats. So macronutrient would be next.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's do that.
So that's time you eat, then the macronutrient, then the micronutrient. So that would be the vitamins and the minerals. So I wouldn't jump straight to saying take this supplement, take that supplement, but it does depend on someone's age and stage, and do they have a condition, and what are they trying to achieve. But if their nutrition is good with a low nutrient density of, I think liver is really good. I think humans should eat omnivorous. So I do think that liver has got a lot of B vitamins. And if you eat enough protein, then you get lots of your carnitine and your taurine. So those are nutrients important for the mitochondria. You get lots of your creatine. And then if you eat lots of vegetables, nuts, seeds, and you're getting your minerals and your electrolytes. But let's face it, like today's modern agriculture, the food is really quite depleting. Quite a lot of things, the soils are quite depleting nutrients. So if someone was really, really super well and doesn't need any supplement, I'd say they still need a supplement, and that is they still need minerals. So I would always
and do you
supplement
propose
minerals.
a multi or specific stuff for people generally?
Like a super well fit person just needs to take minerals, then I would propose a multi-mineral supplement, like with all the trace minerals in it as well. Not just like just zinc, selenium, chromium, molybdenum. All of those are the big ticket ones, but trace minerals are really good. So you get lots of trace minerals from sea salt electrolyte and sea salt mineral products. So those are always my favorite supplements. That would be the top priority in everyone. Electrolytes, sea salt minerals, and potassium. So a lot of people are depleted in potassium. So I know that nowadays with a lot of the big biohacking movements and sports and longevity, everyone's taking electrolytes, which is great, but like we really need the potassium.
Yeah, and a lot of people, they're they just tweak their potassium levels. It can sort out the blood pressure as well. I think there's a bit too much focus on sodium and not enough on potassium.
Yeah, big time. So that would be the vitamins, supplements I think everyone should have would be electrolytes and minerals. And then, like I said, with a condition and with health issues, then I would certainly go for the ubiquinol. I would do creatine. NAD, I wouldn't necessarily do NAD because that's quite expensive. Not everyone can afford that, but definitely B3. So a niacinamide of sorts. And then most people can take a multi-B complex, but some people cannot. If depending on their methylation status, they might get a bit.
Do you propose a methylated B vitamin for people, or does that not work well for some people? Like what I'm saying, should everybody take methylated B, or can methylated B not be great depending on certain genes?
The latter. So I don't propose methylated B, broadly speaking. I would propose, so if we're talking first about energy, mitochondria, I propose B3 and B5. And then if we just want an all-round B, then I would say a multi-B that doesn't necessarily have a lot of methylated Bs, but yeah, a bit of B2, lots of B1 as well. But methylated Bs don't go well with, at least in my patient cohort, because I have tough cases, and that's usually when other things haven't worked. And usually in that community, methylated B can cause a lot more anxiety, aggro, agitation, because people have folate receptor blocks or methyl blocks, so they can't methylate their folates and things like that.
Yeah, interesting. And what is your thoughts on NMN and NR, right? Because they're big in the kind of biohacking communities. I'm just keen to get your thoughts. I took a little bit of NMN sublingual and then I just stopped because for me, I looked at the research. Now, this was a year ago, and there wasn't a lot of what I thought was compelling human data, but I know a lot of people absolutely swear by it. What's your thoughts on it?
So I'm a bit neutral about needing to do NMN or NR versus just B3, partly because I'm working with a patient community with chronic diseases, and they often don't have a lot of funds because there's a lot of supplements to have to take in the end. I do give people relatively big protocols. I'm being conservative, but it does also add up to a lot of things. You have to support the bile, you have to support the liver, you have to support the microbiome, you have to support the neurotransmitters. In the end, you have a supplements as long as, list of it as long as your arm. So cost-wise, NMN is not practical for my patient cohort. The research looks interesting. I'm not jumping straight into that because of being practical. And I already see good results with B3 and just NR. And I already see good results with using other things in my patient group, so I don't just hammer in on that NMN.
My view on that is a watch and wait, because it is bloody expensive as a supplement, and I think there's other ones that are kind of top of the list on that. Okay, so and then just to remind our people, so that's everything from a nutritional perspective, is it?
And then, well, I'll put the last thing in is also when you don't eat. So, a bit of fasting depends again on the person, but if you're trying to get more metabolic flexibility, then it's good to be able to fast. And fasting just means to be able to not eat overnight 12 to 14 hours. And okay, sometimes if you had to skip lunch because you really were that busy, or you skip dinner, you don't fall apart because you're hangry. So it's like be able to not be like that. So people have to work out how to be able to fast and get through that. So I'm not saying that you need to do long fasts for mitochondrial health, but you have to be able to handle a fast.
Yeah, absolutely. Every human being should be able to handle a fast, right? Then the other things to throw at your mitochondria, so that's a very detailed thing around nutrition. What's the other big ticket items for you?
Big ticket items would be avoid blue light. So get the light right. We already said that. And so using a red light panel or red light devices is really just to tip that balance of where just a bit too much blue and not enough red. But if someone is out in nature the whole day and getting a lot of sun, then you don't necessarily need a red light, like just the generic red light panel I'm talking about. You might use red light to specifically treat an ankle injury or an elbow sprain and things like that. So that'd be the blue and the red. And the next thing I would say is do cold.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can induce mitochondrial biogenesis, right?
Very, very, very powerful cold therapy. So that's a huge mitochondrial therapy. And depending on the type of communities you're speaking to, maybe your communities, Paul, are like all out there jumping into ice bath and going gung-ho for it. But my patient community isn't so much because people have chronic fatigue and so on. So we just have to do it very slow and gently. And we usually start doing it with face plunges.
Yeah. I think that's a really good thing for people who have chronic conditions. If they jump into an ice bath, it can just be too much and completely overwhelm them. So face plunges, I totally agree with you. Great. And then maybe a bit of a cold shower. It's just at the end of your normal shower. But, you don't have to be jumping into the ice bath. And you certainly don't need to be spending 10 minutes in an ice bath. That's just an ego trip. I think most of the benefits are in those first 20 seconds when you get into cold water. Right? And what about exercise?
I was going to say that one next. I was like, okay, it's Paul. So yeah, next thing would be exercise. So with my patient community, I guess I don't use the word exercise. I talk about movement.
Physical activity, yeah.
When they have chronic fatigue, they do get upset with being told they have to exercise because it makes them sicker. And so, but I say to them, you still absolutely need to move. You cannot just sit down or lie down. When people have got POTS and, orthostatic intolerance, they're lying down and sitting down a lot. Then you still absolutely need to move. So we need to move for that mitobiogenesis, and that is critical too. And we might even just start the movement with breath. So use a lot of breath, do a lot of lying movements, Pilates, core work, and just starting with that, because that essentially is the most important place. That from a functional perspective is how I'm thinking of it, not just big bulky muscles for metabolic health. I'm thinking first just the right muscles doing the right things is really around our breath, our pelvic floor, our diaphragm, and how that makes a big difference to our neurophysiology.
Yeah, I love it. And the old classic concept of exercise, I think it does apply to people with chronic fatigue. I've seen research on it, is slow progressive overload. Is that just week by week, just add a little bit and add a little bit and add a little bit. And then if it's too much, you just back off a little bit. But I think that concept of progressive overload, it applies to everybody from people with chronic conditions all the way through to elite athletes. Now, Christine, so I presume, is there anything else that we've left off on there? You did talk about a
few more, but
okay,
well,
yeah.
This would be the big ones, nutrition, light, cold, exercise. But I would say magnetism is a really good one for mitochondrial health if people have got conditions. So using PEMF, pulse electromagnetic fields. And then I guess it would be remiss of me as a nutritional medicine doctor not to talk about the microbiota, the microbiome. I mean, everyone knows that, the gut-brain axis microbiome has a huge effect across everything. But I actually think that's still bottom up. And I think the top down to microbiome is the stress in the mitochondria that speaks the microbiome. And I think that research is starting to come out about mitochondrial microbiome crosstalk. So I think that when your mitochondria are healthy and you've got the right light signals, the microbiome will be healthier, as opposed to just shoving in probiotics and, of course, fiber, of course, prebiotics, but just taking probiotics.
Bit of fermented food as well, right, for the fertilizer.
Yeah. And then the last thing is detox, because we can't help but live in a toxic world. So a good old sauna and sweat a couple of times a week is just, I guess if you're exercising hard and you're sweating, you're also doing a double up there.
This is what most people don't realize. The lemon detox diet is horseshit compared to sweat, right? That is the major way. And I guess supporting your phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification and processes in the body through, lots of broccoli, the whole broccoli family, and then onions, garlics, leeks.
Sulfur.
Sulfur supports those 2 pathways, right?
Yeah, totally.
Very cool. Now, are you still taking patients? Because I'm sure there's a shitload of people going, I want her as my doctor.
Yeah. I still take patients. It just depends on the time of year and how heavy the load is. Sometimes there's a bit of a wait, but we're always taking patients. So the clinic is Next Practice GenBiome, GenBiome. It's sort of a generation biome. It's like a biosphere of health and salutogenesis. Salutogenesis, by the way, is health creation for some of your listeners who might not know. We treat diseases for sure, but we prefer or would love to just create health.
Yeah, I love it. And are you on socials or anything? Is there places where people can, are you too busy researching?
No, I'm not on socials. Our clinic's very busy, just word of mouth and education. And our other clinic is MITOCore, MITOCORE, and that is the new clinic, which is much more focused on longevity and mitochondrial health. It's using much more of a naturopathic model. So not necessarily doctors treating diseases, but really for people who...
Yeah, nice. Good and want to be great. Yeah. And are they both based in Sydney?
Yep, they're both in Edgecliff in Sydney.
Lucky bastards. They get the good weather in the winter and they also get your clinics. Christine, this has been absolutely awesome. A great dive into the mitochondria, which are hugely, hugely important. And I think a very, very wide lens view of the mitochondria. And I think for our listeners, there's some real actionable stuff, because your mitochondria don't function well, you're a basket case, right?
Yeah, that's why, join us as mitochondriacs and looking at mitochondria. And if anyone is into longevity and all that, then you should be a mitochondriac.
I love it. Right. That is the title of this talk, Why You Need to Be a Mitochondriac. That is so cool.
I love talking to you. Thank you so much. I appreciate the invite. I know I'm speaking to a different community than what I'm usually speaking to, so I hope this helps your listeners.
Look, absolutely. You've no doubt helped my listeners immensely. That has been great. Thank you for giving you your very precious time to help our listeners. Awesome.
Thanks, Paul.